Now moving on, we're going to switch from the turf. We're going to switch from the turf to the hardwood. And I want to start off with this topic of discussion as well. And this is an interesting one. Damian Lillard with the Portland Trailblazers. Is DameTime running out? Little choice of words there. Little nice wordage from Kyle Russo there. I think it is. I think it's running out. I think it's ran out the last couple of years. Because Portland, we've known the stigma with Portland. As good as Damian Lillard is, as nice of a backcourt as they have, as good of a coach and well represented that Terry Stotts did the Portland Trailblazers organization, was there for 9 years. They lost in the first round the last 5 years. They reached the Western Conference Finals in I believe, 2017 or 2018. And that's all they had to show for it. And in that series, I believe they got swept against the Golden State Warriors. It's time to move on from Damian Lillard. And today, I believe the GM of the Portland Trailblazers came out and said that guys like CJ McCollum, guys like Damian Lillard, Nurkic, and Covington will all be coming back. Now, what is a GM really supposed to say? To me, that's all fodder. I think that's to impede some type of visual or aura that everything is okay in Portland, when in reality, you just parted ways with Terry Stotts. Before the series even started against Denver, there was word that Terry Stotts, if he didn't have a nice playoff push, he was gone anyway. So what kind of mindset is that going into your first series of the first round of this year's playoffs, that this guy was pretty much already fired? Portland's in trouble. And I think it all stems down to Damian Lillard. And not because Damian Lillard is a bad player. Damian Lillard is a phenomenal player. The problem is this, is that Damian Lillard, while as great as he is, Portland is one of the smallest market basketball teams in the entire NBA. And Portland is a team that, again, doesn't have a lot of money to spend. And while they don't have a lot of money to spend, they also don't have a lot of draft capital. And the draft capital in which they have, it doesn't mean that much in the NBA. Why? Because it's not like the NFL where a first-round pick is as valuable as it is. Because Portland consistently has been 20-plus and above in terms of where they stand out of the 32 teams in the NBA. 30 teams in the NBA, excuse me. They're in the top 20. Why? Because Damian Lillard is as good as he is, makes them and puts them in that position. So they're not cashing in on a Cade Cunningham this year. They're not cashing in on a Jonathan Kuminga, a Jalen Suggs, a Jalen Green. They're not getting the likes of those guys. They're getting guys in the top 20, and hopefully those turn into nice role players to add to a Damian Lillard, a CJ McCollum, and a Nurkic. But that's not what's going to cut it. I don't remember who I was listening to the other day, but they said something that was very intelligent. I took that to I took that to heart, took that to mind, was that in this league, finding superstars is hard. But finding that number two to be with that superstar that Damian Lillard is even harder. And I couldn't agree with that more. Because you look at CJ McCollum, while I like him a lot, I really think he's a great player. He's a liability. As lethal as that backcourt is offensively, defensively, they are a tremendous liability. And that's why they aren't winning games. That's why Damian Lillard has to put up 40-something points, has to put up 50-point nights to keep them competitive. Because if a CJ doesn't show up, combined with the fact that they're both liabilities on defense, they're not winning the basketball game. I think it was game 4, game 5 of the series against Denver. Damian Lillard had a phenomenal night, that double OT thriller, where he was just hitting shot after shot after shot, set the all-time record for most threes made in a playoff game with 12. And it didn't matter. They still lost the game. And with that being said, how do you further improve? And the answer is, I don't think you further improve. I think you click the reset button. Because this team has been adding pieces for years now, and it doesn't seem to matter. Whether it was acquiring a Norman Powell for a Gary Trent swap, which I thought was a nice addition. Whether it was bringing back an Enes Kanter. Whether it was bringing in Hassan Whiteside last season. Whether it was the development of Anfernee Simons. Whether it was trading for Robert Covington, who at this point in time, a couple of years ago, was one of the most highly coveted free agency targets because of his two-way ability and his tremendous defensive value. because of the fact that CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard are such defensive liabilities. But nothing seems to matter. Because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, as good as they are, because I know I could speak for myself on this, when has anybody picked them to come out of the Western Conference? When has anybody put pen to paper and said that the Portland Trailblazers will reach the Western Conference Finals and have a legitimate chance to win it? Nobody. The answer is nobody. As far as I'm concerned, the answer is nobody. And that's why I think they have to hit the reset button. And I don't know what kind of value. Let's say they decide to keep Dame, which I don't think would be smart, as he is an aging point guard and he has a massive amount of money on that contract. And that's why it makes it even harder for Portland, because of all the money they got tied up into players like a Norman Powell, like a Robert Covington, like a Nurkic, like a CJ McCollum, and then, of course, Damian Lillard making over $200 million already in a small market area. What more can you do? And you go to guys like CJ and you say to yourself, well, what value does CJ McCollum really hold? And what pieces, if I trade him as my number 2, what am I getting back to bring in to get a solid number 2? And the answer is, I don't think there is one. Because what team, because on other teams, I don't know if CJ McCollum could even be a 2. I think he'd be more so a 3. And that's where I stand right now. That's where I stand. That's where I stand right now. Because I don't think that it's possible for Portland to get better with this team that they have right now. Tom Scavetta saying, I don't know. Maybe in Portland. That's where I stand. Because even if you trade CJ McCollum, you're not getting a number 2 to solve this problem that the Portland Trailblazers are having the last 4 or 5 years. You're not. And that's why I think that you'll be forced to reset. And while your GM could talk and say all these things and saying that, oh, we're bringing everybody back and we're bringing everybody back, it's because what is he supposed to say? Is he supposed to put the fan base in a frantic mode and be scared and say, oh my God, we're going to be tanking now. This is going to be a terrible team. We're going to be a team based on draft capital, which I don't think it'll be a bad thing. Again, losing a Damian Lillard, a guy that's been highly vocal and says that, he wants to be in Portland forever, even if that does mean being in a championship. The minute they lost that Denver game, what did he post out on social media? Posted a quote basically saying, how much more opportunities am I going to give myself in Portland before the time is up? And the clock is ticking on Dame. The clock is ticking. Well, he's still performing at this really high level. Father Time wins all. And Damian Lillard, as a 30-year-old point guard, I think turning 31 in July, the clock is ticking. And I think that he needs to find his way out. I don't think it's going to get ugly, because I don't think Damian Lillard is that type of guy to be vocal and to say, I'm going to sit out and be that type of guy to do so. But when you see trades like we just saw James Harden go to Brooklyn. If you're Portland and you're saying that, well, for James Harden, they got 7 first-round picks and a lot of players getting swapped in a 4-team deal between the Pacers, the Houston Rockets, the Brooklyn Nets, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. If you're saying that as a franchise, why aren't you being a part of that? Why aren't you cashing in on it now? What, are you going to wait and drain the remaining years of Damian Lillard where ultimately there may be no value? I don't think that would be smart. And I get it, the fan base loves him, but they are not winning with this team. And they're just not. And as good as Damian Lillard is, all these years, right? As good as he is, who's coming to Portland? Who's coming to Portland? What big free agent, what big market fish is signing with Portland? The answer is nobody, because nobody wants to play there. As good as Damian Lillard is, nobody wants to play there. And that's why I think he has to leave. Dame to who? What team adds him and gets to the finals? Sal, this is where I think it gets really interesting. This is where I think it gets really, really interesting. And I've had a couple discussions with people about where he could potentially go. And it becomes really tough, because I think that there's a solid 4 teams, 5 teams out there. I think the likes of the Lakers will always be involved. I think Miami can definitely be involved, because I think they'd have a nice package to put together, youth-wise and pick-wise. Same thing with the Knicks. I think that Philadelphia, depending on how this series with the Hawks go, or if they reach the Eastern Conference Finals, depending on how that goes, that can determine whether the Ben Simmons experiment is done too, which I'll get into in a little bit. Other teams like the Clippers as well. But two teams that are actually in the playoffs right now that I think is actually kind of a hot take would be the Suns and the Jazz. And let me explain. Chris Paul has already stated that he plans on declining his option in his contract to re-up and get his last big contract before, his time is done in the NBA as a 36-year-old point guard who has an injury past. Now, if you're the Phoenix Suns, an injury-prone CP3 who either turned 36 this year or is turning 37 this year, I don't know. As good as Chris Paul has been, as great as his veteran leadership has made Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, Cameron Payne, DeAndre Ayton, as good as he's made them, is he going to be here for the long haul? Is he going to be able to do that consistently? We've seen it all series long between the Lakers and now here with the Denver Nuggets in Game 1. He's flying all around the court. He's grabbing his shoulder in some of these games. And while I root for Chris Paul and I hope that the Phoenix Suns get there or at the finish line or represent the Western Conference when all said is done, it's all dependent upon if he's healthy. Because otherwise that team is still very young, and I don't think that they can compete at that same level without him on the court. Now, you're telling me if I'm Phoenix, that Damian Lillard is out there. He's 5 or 6 years younger than Chris Paul. He's making ultimately similar money that Chris Paul would be asking for in this new re-upped contract. So you're telling me you have an opportunity to get a younger point guard who may not be as game manager pass savvy, but a lethal backcourt of him and Devin Booker? I don't think you could throw your name out of the ring. I think you got to be right on that, because that'll keep you competitive for years. How many years will Chris Paul as an aging point guard really keep you at this competitive level? Devin Booker, the first 6 years of his career, while he was a phenomenal player, never got the recognition because they never provided him with a solid point guard. And what happens in year 1? They give him a point guard, and while it's a very good point guard, they knock off the Lakers, and they're playing really well against this Denver team in Game 1 so far. So I think that could be an interesting candidate. And then the other one that I said before, the Utah Jazz, another interesting candidate. The Utah Jazz are a team that I've said repetitively are built on chemistry. While I think they have a lot of great individual talent, I wouldn't say they have a lot of superstars outside of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. They're carried by the likes of other guys, solid role players like a Jordan Clarkson, like a Joe Ingles, like a Royce O'Neal. Those are the guys that are, under the radar, a Bogdanovich, under the radar type of guys that help and contribute every single night, but don't get the same similar star recognition. And a guy that I left off the list was the point guard that they have right now, and that's Mike Conley. Another guy that has an injury history, another guy that has really never gotten the recognition with the Memphis Grizzlies, really having a good season now with the Utah Jazz. But again, he'll be a free agent, and he'll be looking to re-up on a contract. Now, as an aging, veteran, injured point guard, if you're the Utah Jazz, do you want to give him all that money that he'd be requesting? Or would you rather take Damian Lillard? And I think, again, another team, they got to be in the ring for Damian Lillard. Because he is a guy, while Chris Paul and Mike Conley are good now, how many more good years are you getting left? Whereas a Damian Lillard, who was only turning 31 in July, you get a lot of more good years of offense out of Damian Lillard. And I think those are two teams that if you want to stay competitive in this Western Conference that is very deep, that's a move that you go look to make. So those are two teams that I think that while they are making it far, and while I think that they could both be in the Western Conference Finals come the next couple weeks, I think those are two teams at the point guard position in which there is some question due to age and injury at those two positions in which they have at this moment in time. So we'll see what happens. But as far as their GM stated, nobody's moving, I don't believe that to be true. I think that people will be moving. It'll just be a matter of time until the offers are sweet enough. Just like Houston said, they didn't want to move James Harden until he ultimately made it impossible for them to play him, and they were left no choice but to trade him.